you have to say is, "Hey, don't you have to use the bathroom?" And he'll be like, "Oh my God, I do have to use the bathroom." And he'll be sitting here through the whole podcast thinking, "Gotta go to the bathroom."
So if you see it, so if you see this, that means I went to the bathroom.
And this is how the live show starts. Well, yeah, we're live. Welcome to the Lovecraft Easing Podcast, where we will not be talking about bathrooms anymore today, or at least I don't think so. And our guests today is Stephen Graham Jones and Paul Tremblay. Hey, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
So, Paul, you know, this pickle thing is old. I wasn't going to bring it up. It's just, I thought it's just an old joke. Okay, let's move on. And I swear to God, my wife knows nothing about you. 20 minutes ago, she's on the internet. She's like, "Oh my God, they're making Pepsi with a splash of pickle now."
Why? Why, for God's sakes?
I'm like, whoever's running this simulation is punking me, you know, because I'm about to go live with Paul Tremblay, and he hates pickles.
Yeah. Well, all I would say is reaffirms why I don't like Pepsi. Also, so I guess I have more to say. Steven similarly hates pickles. Like, I think his hatred is as strong, and somehow he's avoided. I guess, he's avoided it by being like an actually talented writer, as opposed to me, who's just going to be, if I'm remembered for anything, it will be remembered for not liking pickles.
Yeah, so I want to send this out.
My mother, when I was a kid, made me drink a big glass of pickle juice every day because she thought it was good for me. I don't know. I couldn't figure it out. To this day, I don't know why she would torment me so.
I mean, and that's why you became a serial killer.
Yeah. Oh, man. I saw a guy at the skating rink when I was in 6th grade. Somebody bought the last pickle out of the big jug, and he took it outside and drank. He drank a lot of it, and a lot of it went down his front, you know? and then he put it aside, and somebody gave him like $5 because it was a bet. And he was like, yep. And then he just started throwing up like that projectile, like Saturday Night Live kind of throwing up.
From then on, you hated pickles.
No, it was before then, but that just re-entrenched my disgust with the whole enterprise.
Well, okay, so I'll just put it out there for anyone hosting Paul Tremblay or Stephen Graham Jones in the future. Have the new Pepsi with a splash of pickle ready for these guys as a refreshment. So
it's more dangerous for Steven because Steven, aren't you a Pepsi guy? Don't you like Pepsi?
I am. I'm a Pepsi guy. Yeah. So I might get fooled, man. I might see that little logo and do it. Oh man.
And then you'll be just like that guy, projectile.
I will. And then I'll just pass out and people will draw mustaches on me and stuff.
Well, thanks for being here, guys. This is the Lovecraft Easing Podcast. It's June 28th, 2020. We'll introduce the panelists real quick, and then if you guys introduce yourself and talk about probably books or something, maybe. Or Bridget, why don't you go?
Oh, hello. I am Bridget. I am a composer and artist and a huge horror fan.
Mr. Langan. That's how we refer to him on the show, Mr. Langan.
That's how I insist they refer to me. No one would go for Count Langan because I thought that was really cool, but it's hi, I'm John Langan. I write horror. I've brought German Godzilla with me.
Oh, thank God! Yes.
I'm here, and I'm so happy to be here on the show with everyone. I'm here as a 50-foot Indian, and I would like to fight him. So. It's out of control sometimes. Clearly, he's been hitting the old pickle juice.
Searching for the mute button for John. No, actually, I like German Godzilla. I love it when you bring out German Godzilla.
Everybody loves German Godzilla.
How does he roar in German?
His
roaring is.
Actually, he tends to shout Achtung, but we won't go there.
Rich Bunting.
Hey, I'm Rich. I'm a horror fan, and I do nothing of any other kind of substance.
Well, you support me quite heavily.
That's right.
And then we have Matthew Carpenter, who I think also has the prize of the week.
Yes, remember to watch Easing Movie Night. See the notices on our board. It's every Saturday, 9 p.m. Central. A prize today if you want to win a copy of the first issue of Occult Detective Quarterly magazine.
Nice.
just send an email to easyprizes@gmail.com and put OD in the subject heading, and you may win.
Yeah, and Matt doesn't draw for a couple of weeks. So if you're listening to this on the road, like next week or something, you probably still have time to get that in there. As far as movie night goes, go to Cast, KAST, and then what's the name of the group, Matt?
Easy Movie Night.
Easy Movie Night. That makes sense. So welcome to my COVID haircut day. I don't know what. Can't go get a haircut anymore, I guess. So, Stephen and Paul. Stephen, you got a book coming out called Survivor Song.
Paul.
No, that's Paul.
No, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. I mixed you guys up so much.
They're off to a fantastic start.
Well, they look exactly alike. It's just,
I know. I mean, no, Paul's wife wishes they did.
Stephen, The Only Good Indians, which I am really, really enjoying, man.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Thank you.
It comes out on the 14th, is that right?
Correct, a week after Paul's book. Yep.
Yeah. Why don't we start with you and maybe kind of go back and forth? What's the premise of The Only Good Indians?
It's 4 guys make a bad decision hunting one day, and then 10 years later that comes back to both haunt and hunt them, I guess. They have to pay for their crimes.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm reading this book, and it's so refreshing when you're reading a book and then just something just hits you out of the blue. You have no idea it's coming. And this is spoiler free, so I'm sure as hell not going to say what it is. But that first one, Stephen, I'm like, what the hell? Man, that escalated quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My challenge, talking about that plot point you're talking about, I love it when I'm reading a book and I get 80 pages in, 120 pages in, and something happens, and I'm like, the book has to be over now. There can't be anything after this. Right. I love that feeling, and then I know there's still 200 more pages to go. So that was my challenge, and I just wanted to see if I could stage something remotely like that.
Well, it sure works. I'm about 75% finished. I'm really enjoying the hell out of it, and
thank you.
It's incredible.
Can I jump in and ask Stephen, really, since we talked? What you just said to me is really interesting about
just conversation.
That 80-page point. Did you know what was going to happen after that, or just a vague sense? Had you planned it out? No.
Not even remotely. I thought it was over too. Actually. I wrote this novel the same way I wrote my old forever ago novel Demon Theory. When I wrote the first part of Demon Theory, I thought, this is it. This is over. I just wrote a little 110-page novella. And then I thought, wait, what about if I did a second part and another part after that? And I did this book the same way I did Demon Theory, just trying to, I love it when there'll be a horror movie that is not supposed to be a success, but it catches fire. And then the production company has to bring in some writer to try to salvage the remains of the first movie to dream up a sequel when that sequel was never intended. I love those sequels that are just like somebody sifted the ashes and tried to mold something. That's one of my favorite things.
Yeah. What was the genesis of this? If you can.
The Only Good Indians. The genesis was, let's see. I had just I guess this is a long story. I don't want to take up Paul's time, but
please do.
No, take it up. That's totally fine.
Let's see. So Margles came out, and then I needed to write another novel. So I wrote another novel, and my agent pitched it around, and everybody rejected it at the pitch stage, or some people saw the manuscript, they rejected it at that stage. And so then I wrote another novel, and it got rejected by maybe my agent. I don't know. There's enough rejection to go around. Everybody was rejecting everything. And then I wrote this, and I wrote it pretty fast too. I don't remember how fast. I don't know, pretty quick anyways. And let me think. The first part of it, and I know you, Mike, and Paul, and John have all read this. The first part was initially in what felt like second person, but then there was the mask came off at the end of the break into the second part, and you realize it's been a dramatic monologue all along, not second person. And I thought that was big fun, But
yeah, that was another surprise too.
Yeah. But my editor wisely told me that was stupid, So I had to go back and make it different. I mean, it's a lot better because of that, I think. And the genesis, my initial title for this novel was Where the Old Ones Go. Yeah, Where the Old Ones Go, which now is a chapter title, I believe. And then for a while it was Elkhead Woman, and now it's The Only Good Indians. But y'all all know this. Novels go through all kinds of transformations process. They become everything and nothing. But as for how my agent sold this, that's kind of a fun story for me. Mm-hmm. My agent BJ Robbins was on a panel at some conference or convention, and agents and editors, and this is how I recall the story. Maybe she'll come in and correct me, or the editor Joe Monty will. But she was exiting the panel, and one of the editors who was on the panel with her was Joe Monty, who was the editor of Only Good Indians saga, and he said something like, "Who are you representing?" And she said, "Me." And he said, "I like his stuff." And she said, "Well, let me send you this novel." And that's how it happened. It wasn't like anything official, just totally random at a convention. And
nice.
I mean, you hear about that's how comic books work. Comic books are always so at the bar or whatever. But you always think novels work differently, but sometimes they don't.
The tense change was I'm trying to think of where I've seen that in any other book. I'm sure I have, but it was a nice surprise as well, Stephen.
Oh, thank you. If I have a model for that, or a challenge, somebody who I was answering what I saw as a challenge, it would be Philip K. Dick's Radio Free Albemuth, where halfway through that novel, mid-sentence, he stops and tells the back part of what feels like a different novel. And I was always so impressed with just the nerve of doing that,
Yeah, he had a lot of nerve.
Yeah, he did. But when you do that much speed, you get a lot of nerve.
Yes, that's true. So let me open this up to anyone like John, Paul. You guys know Stephen pretty well. Hit him with some questions.
I'd like a comment.
Yeah.
I've actually come to you later. The first novel of yours that I read was Mongrels. Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what to expect going into it. Is a completely unusual twist on werewolves. And yet, by so being, it rang so true. So what I really liked about your writing was, first of all, the characters were in context very believable. And the situation that you found them in, the way you described their life, it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense too. Why would they be living any other way? They wouldn't be in the suburbs in a nice home. It's like... And then the emotional journey of the young protagonist, which in a lot of ways was not even told directly, but through how people were talking to him. That was a very clever piece of writing. So I'm really kind of looking forward to this one to see if that's like, nothing's the same, of course. Novels aren't the same. But the way that you wrote that in context, it was very organic and super great novel, man. Just thanks.
Well, thank you very much. That's another novel where I wasn't even writing the novel. I was just jacking around, killing a couple of weeks with werewolf stories, and then I thought, what if I made them all have the same name? Like what if the same name went through all the stories and it became a novel? But yeah, no, it was just I'm sure that was just a lucky shot. Everything else will be wildly different and less appealing.
I kind of doubt that. John, Paul.
I actually have a ton of questions, but I don't.
Yeah, you're low again, so you might have to.
Am I low again? How about now?
That's better.
Is it better now? I'll write them and hold them up.
All right.
Stephen, can you hear me? Tommy, can you hear me? It's no. Okay. So one thing I thought, because I was blown away by The Only Good Indians as well.
Thank you.
In fact, I think I wrote you a fan letter like in the middle of the night or something.
Thank you.
That. And I taped it to your window, and you still have it. We'll talk about that later, But no, one of the things that struck me, right, was like reading the book as this kind of like response to Straub's ghost story, because it's and I don't know if that's like a kind of an like plot at this point where the younger men usually who commit some kind of trespass and then have to answer for that trespass later on. And I guess the difference is that I think anyway that in Straub's book, that character, who's also a spirit character, is a spirit character sort of from the get-go, and so she's kind of toying with them, so that later in the novel, although they've done something kind of I'm trying to be really like spoiler free, right? But so although they've done something kind of terrible to her, because she was a monster from the get-go, we kind of have this sense that, well, she was always just toying with them. Whereas in The Only Good Indians, these guys do this thing that they shouldn't have done, and then and the supernatural is born out of that. Maybe there was something there, but it's kind of born out, and that creates this whole need for balancing. But I kind of have the sense, man, at the very end, that maybe the supernatural also commits a sort of a trespass. Okay, yeah, okay, all right. I know that's like so elliptical, and people are like, "What the heck?" But that like that's the kind of get out of jail card, or something like that. You know, it's like that's how things are gonna resolve themselves.
Yeah, you know, it's neat listening to you ask that question or say that, because you think of it the same way I do. You say trespass, and that's what I think too. Which it sounds, I guess we're both just we've been cultured into like Western religion. You know, like what is that? The part of that Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. But in The Only Good Indians, it's literally a trespass. You know, that's
like literally and figuratively.
Yeah, that gets them. But yeah, with like, you know, people always come hard at the slasher because it's easy to come hard at, you know. And one thing they say is, I'm always so happy that all these people get killed, and so that always kind of catches with me. And I thought, well, what if we told a slasher where we actually like the characters, you know? And so that's what I tried to do here, where they screwed up, but we've all screwed up. I mean, we could go around the room, the virtual room, and we've all done something stupid when we were 25 or something, you know? And if the specter of whatever Burger King attendant that we wronged in the drive-thru comes back for us, we're going to be surprised, you know, because we thought we got away with that, you know. Or maybe I'm speaking for myself with Burger King attendants. I don't know.
No.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you know about Philly?
Yeah, you know, it's funny, Stephen, that you say that, because it occurred to me the whole time I'm reading it, I'm like, these guys screwed up, but they were kids basically in their 20s, you know, and we've all done it. So yeah.
I found that utterly heartbreaking, especially sort of the end of the first part. Besides it being shocking, you know, I found much of that heartbreaking. You know, for not the whole book, but for so many parts of the book, as the writer, you were so, I don't want to say remorseless, but like, you know, there isn't forgiveness for a long time, you know, throughout that novel. And I admire your ruthlessness within your prose. Like, I feel like you do.
That's something coming from you, man.
And I also mean it as like a mark of integrity as well. Like, you know, he's not afraid to go to certain places, but to go there, what's the word I'm looking for? But I mean, he goes there honestly. You know, even if it's not going to result in an outcome that you want as a reader, you understand why these things are happening.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, I always enjoy, like, we break down stories because we've talked about different stories. Even you helped me with my draft of Survivor Song, and Steve went on this big thing about, well, this person did this, so they need their comeuppance here, and like he's always thinking about the justice slasher piece of things, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But there was something like, and I'm still trying to think about how exactly to articulate this, you know, and it's maybe the problem just of reading, you know, you're reading this novel, right? I'm reading this novel, right? And so it's difficult to avoid or resist the temptation to read it like allegorically, like, oh, if you're a Native American man, these are all the different, you know, sort of paths and perils that await you. And, you know, so that you see, like, Lewis, who's gotten away from the reservation, who's married this white girl, and who seems to have a really good relationship with her. Like he can't enjoy that, like that, and he's like, wanders into some kind of seedy, like sort of quasi Updike situation where there's like the other girl at the post office who's like, "Hey, baby," and but like all of that kind of all of that kind of middle class drama, like it's all he doesn't get to have that, and the other guys at the end when they're having the sweat lodge, like it's this heartbreaking moment where like they're kind of they're like, wait, maybe all this stuff that we learned when we were kids wasn't BS, and maybe there's some good to it, and like they're having this profound growth as characters, and it's like, sorry, that's and so that's like with what Paul's saying, like it's just utterly ruthless. Like there's I mean, the only, how would I put this, there's Denny, right? I guess the game warden, right? And I guess you could say he did do the right thing. Like he's the game warden. He obeys the rules. And but like, man, there ain't no forgiveness if you break the rules.
No, there's not. I mean, if you start forgiving people for breaking the rules, then where does it stop? I mean, if somebody pops a little white-tailed doe and you just slap them on the wrist and say, go on your way, then what if they mow down 14 moose? That's a totally different thing, because there's so much fewer. I mean, it's a different thing to us because we see that there's so much fewer moose. I'm sure to the white-tailed doe, it kind of sucked. I mean, she had a different take on it, I suspect, for a moment. But yeah, forgiveness is tricky. I mean, in the slasher, you're right. There's hardly ever forgiveness in the slasher, for sure. And Paul is right too. I do always think in cycles of justice. That's just my default thinking, but I try to push back against that as well, because I think if I subscribe only to that, then my stuff probably becomes mechanical and predictable. So I've got to. Y'all all know this. You've got to break what you consider your own rules. And go into territory you haven't been before.
I want to see the Friday the 13th movie now where Jason and his mom hug. Like, it's okay.
Yeah. John, you use the word ruthless, and it's difficult to talk about this without spoilers, so I'll attempt not to do that. But there's a particular character that you think he's more or less a regular guy, living his life, and suddenly he's sociopathic with his behavior. And I'm thinking, did he snap, or was he just basically always sociopathic? Hard to say.
There's a thing with a motorcycle wheel that like completely freaked me out, and I was like,
yes.
Who thinks of that? Who thinks of that?
People with hair, man. People with hair.
Good point. Yeah.
As someone whose hair is rapidly thinning, I don't know what that's all about, but I'll take your word for it. What about I wonder, can we tie this in just for a second? I mean, this is like, Saga's also published Attack of the 50-Foot Indian, which is in some ways, very, very different kind of a story. But, I couldn't help, like, because in some ways I kept thinking about that character on the Justice, was the Super Friends. The guy who I think that was it. He grows to like grow large and that sort of stuff. And
what was he? Was he maybe something Apache? What was his name?
That sounds right.
It does.
Is he the one who said Inukchuk or something, and then he grows?
I think that was And but what struck me about the story was, so in some ways it was like it made me think of that character. It's obviously like a sort of a kaiju. But he's also like, the thing about him is that he gets I'll spoil this, just but you'll see how it happens. But like he gets to escape, like he gets to be rescued, and there's something about that I kind of felt like this was in dialogue with the Only Good Indians, that he's like this kind of mythic figure, and all the tribes are trying to claim him for their own. And there's all this, I mean, there's a lot. It's a very funny story in a lot of ways, right? Because everybody's like, no, he's one of ours. No, he's one of ours. But ultimately he gets to escape into this, like this sort of, like a spaceship almost, or this gigantic canoe. And that, it's like this powerfully redemptive kind of thing, that he's this mythic or mythic seeming figure, and he doesn't get doesn't get shot down by the airplanes. He doesn't get King Konged. He winds up getting away, and that in and of itself is really, that's a really important ending. That's a really almost as a kind of a counterpoint to the Only Good Indians. But I don't know if that makes sense or not. But.
No, that makes sense. I've had people. Who was it? Laurel Hightower, I think she was saying that the Only Good Indians and Attack of the 50-Foot Indian are like companion pieces, and I think I wrote that story not long after I was like deep in edits for this, and so it was like at the front of my brain. So I was thinking about other ways and other dynamics and stuff, and so then I just kicked this story out. And I know Paul was there the first time I read it at ReaderCon. Were you there too? Paul was there.
Yeah, Paul was always there.
Did you read that scene?
I read the whole story in 32 minutes. It was not easy to do. I thought I only had 30 minutes. It turns out I had an hour, but it's too late to go back and slow down. But that was the first time I'd read it out loud. It was really fun.
It was fun. I mean, the room was wrapped. Steven's an excellent reader. I mean, he's on my short list of authors that I want to see read live. Michael Sisko and Steven are really two at the top.
Thank you.
Liz Hand as well.
I've never heard Liz read. I've only read her.
Okay. She does all the voices and
Really? Oh, neat.
Yeah. She's so. Stephen, one more question then. With both The Only Good Indians and Attack of the 50-Foot Indian, last year at ReaderCon, when you were one of the guests of honor and Paul was interviewing you, one of the things you talked about was how your early novels were very much sort of meditations on, or involved meditations on Indian identity. But then you said, you in part, you didn't want to be put in a box. You were like, nope, that's not, you're not going to get to just sort of see me as a category as opposed to an individual writer. And yet here you are after having written things like Mongrels and whatever. And how do you see that? Like, I don't want to say coming back to the box, but do you know what I mean? Like coming back to.
No, I know what you mean totally. And part of my answer here is I think what I told Paul on stage at ReaderCon. But like after 3 or 4 or 5 books early in the 2000s, I kept getting questions at book events that would not be about the book. They would be about using the book as a lens onto like a culture or a plight or a tragedy, that kind of stuff. And that it makes me sick when people don't engage art as art. I'm not saying that what I do is art, but it wants to be art anyways, and that kind of dynamic is really dangerous. I think it just dismisses the book and uses it as a vehicle to get somewhere else. But and so I said, screw this. I'm going to make it hard for people asking these questions to ask those same questions anymore. So I started doing zombies and werewolves and vampires and everything, which had always been closest to my heart anyways. That's what I grew up reading. And I mean, it's not like my early books didn't have a lot of junk. They had like giant coyotes and all kinds of weird stuff going. But there may have been some vampires and werewolves too. I don't remember. But then, so I became like 2 writers then. I felt like there was the me who was getting to do horror, but the me who was still like satisfying some other impulse, where I was doing novels like Flesh Boy or Not for Nothing or Growing Up Dead in Texas, novels that aren't horror at all, or they're a different kind of horror if they are horror. Flesh Boy is probably horror because it's about a kid working the window of his father's drive-through urinal. That's, to me, a really intense horror. But,
yeah.
We've all
been to hell and he doesn't know it.
But I felt like I was 2 writers. I was having to like, I thought maybe I should use 2 different names, but then I did Mongrels, and with Mongrels, I was able to write about, like, use the content from the genre closest to my heart, horror, but use it in kind of like a form that was more beholden to the other writer I was pretending to be or whatever. And so that I felt like Mongrels knitted me back together into a single person, a single writer, which was really wonderful to be one person instead of two people. And so then this Only Good Indians is my first novel since Mongrels. It's my first novel I feel like I'm a whole person again instead of like half a person, if that makes sense. And so then for me it makes sense for me to kind of go back to what I started out doing anyways, but I'm still doing what I did in Mongrels. I'm using like different forms but the content that I love. Slashers are what they're closest to my heart forever. But the form of the 3-part structure of this, it's not from Demon Theory, which is also in 3 parts, or if it is, then Demon Theory is from Gertrude Stein's old 3 Lives thing, which is like 3 novellas that work together as a novel, sort of. And I remember in grad school reading 3 Lives, I was just so fascinated by how she did this and what it was how these pieces played against each other. And it infected me forever. And Gertrude Stein's dangerous to get infected with because you go down some long, dark rabbit holes, and you end up in places you never planned to be. But she's really good too, of course, just you don't want to go so far as The Making of Americans, which if y'all never read that, I can't recommend you don't read it enough because it's not it's like 900 it's 900 pages of her trying to use repetition to carve through our consciousness to some bottom layer of awareness or something. And it's a good experiment, but it's like 850 pages too long.
Yeah, you sold me on not reading that right away.
Yeah.
No, but it's one of those books, right? I feel that way about Moby Dick. I love it, but if people say I don't like it, I'm like, that's totally fine. No argument.
I've talked to people about Moby Dick before, and I remember there being a chapter where everybody sings, like it becomes like a pirate play. Is there not that chapter? Am I like crosswiring it with something else?
There are a couple of chapters that are written as a play, as a couple.
Okay.
As dramas. I don't remember music, but I mean, who knows, man? It's been a little while.
Yeah.
So,
I do love Moby.
I like the thought of being able to tell people, "Oh yeah, there's you got to wait till you get to the musical part. That's the best
part." Yeah, my memory is like everybody on the deck with their arms around each other, like kicking like a kick line, and just like you're having fun out on the high seas chasing a whale.
Oh my God.
I love that. I love my memory of that, anyways. But I haven't read that book.
You swap that in for the scene where they're all like in the sperm together, and they're all like splashing in the sperm, and and one guy takes the whale's foreskin and like puts it on his coat. You think I'm making this up, people, but go read it. It's all in there.
Those technology chapters, that's the heart of it. Mike, you were saying something. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, man. Well, first of all, I want to point out that these books, it's no matter how well known or an author is, it always helps when you pre-order, and they're available to pre-order on Amazon and probably on the publisher pages, I'm assuming. But do that. And the Only Good Indians, man, it's a hell of a ride. It really went and it's going in places I didn't expect. So
I actually pre-ordered it, and I got an email from Barnes & Noble saying it's going to be here July 1st. So that's 2 weeks earlier than, I don't know if I got lucky or if Barnes & Noble sold it too soon.
Yeah, well, you're wrench bunting, so they knew that.
No, I got some heads up from people today that they just got shipping notices as well, and I haven't even seen the book yet, so it'll be neat to see it showing up on people's Twitter feeds or something,
Yeah, great. Paul, anything else on the Only Good Indians for Stephen?
Well, I mean, I'll ask this, even though I've talked to this about Stephen a ton, and like we talked about at ReaderCon, but I do think it's kind of an interesting story, and to me, it's always been like my way into, Stephen's work, which, like within the last month, that occurred to me, like aside from Stephen King, who's written 1,000 novels or whatever, the writer I've read the most of after him is Stephen Grant Jones. I think I've read like 18 books or so.
Thank you.
So anyway, so I first met Stephen because, like John, writing a fan letter to Stephen, I wrote a fan letter to Stephen after I read Demon Theory, which I just happened to pull out. The other book I pulled out, though, is because he looks like such a rock star on this cover. I mean, come
on. You and I will never look that cool, Tremblay.
Speak for yourself,
I see what you mean, John.
No, so I read Demon Theory and just was blown away. I loved it. And I emailed him, and I think Stephen happened to read like a couple of chiding stories, so he knew who I was, and we just sort of hit it off. And like a couple of years later, I met him in Providence because he was speaking at Brown University. We had dinner, and I brought my stack of books, and I had like 3 or 4 books, and most of his signatures for each book was Paul. This one is pure autobiography. He wrote that for Demon Theory. He wrote that for The Trial of Nolan Ducati. And at first, I just thought he was like half kidding, especially at that point in my own writing life too. But seeing the more and more books that come out, even though sometimes, in some books it might be a little outlandish, like sharks versus zombies or whatever. What was that? No, yeah, it might be a little bit harder. Zombie Bake Off. What was the one with sharks?
Zombie sharks with metal teeth.
Yeah, zombie sharks with metal teeth. Thank you. In the kitten hand grenade story, it's a little bit harder maybe to see the autobiography appear in it. But I don't know. So for knowing Steve for a while, like that was part of, maybe there's always a danger when you know a writer like so well personally, like you can't help but project their life into what's happening. Especially when I was reading the first 80 pages, because I won't spoil what happens, but like Stephen had told me like a year or two ago that he was doing this thing that starts the horribleness in the book. So I was reading it, and then what happened was like, oh my God, no. So anyway, I don't know if you want to, like, that's a long ramble, but like, if you wouldn't want to talk for like a minute or two just about the idea of I mean, has your view changed on how autobiography does or doesn't fit in your work, as you continue as a writer?
No, they are still all autobiography, and that comes from the first novel I wrote, The Fast Red Road. I wrote that in 1998, and I wrote it really, really quickly. I mean, really quickly for me then. I think it took me 10 months. But what happened was I was at this thing called Writers Harvest at Florida State University, where I was working on my doctorate. And Writers Harvest is where they bring together our editors and agents and students, and we all we mingle and talk and network and make connections, all that stuff. And I was talking to Janet Silver, who was working at one of the big publishers, Houghton Mifflin, maybe back then. This is 98. This was probably 97 actually. And my dissertation director, Janet Silver was her editor, and so the three of us are talking. And then Janet Burroway says, I'll just let y'all talk. And she went over to some other circle. And so I was face to face with this high powered editor, and I was like withering. And then I had this like out of body experience where I heard myself telling her about this novel. And at the end of like this 5-minute detailed outline synopsis pitch for this novel, she says, that sounds like exactly what I want to read. Can you send it to me on Monday? And I said, let me just do one more pass across it because I want to make it perfect. And she said, I'm ready when you are. And so I went home like at 3 that morning and I started that novel, because I had not written it, of course. And so then I didn't have I've never given myself this luxury, but especially this first time, I didn't have the luxury of like what a novel is. You go 10 or 12 pages. What it is for me, you go 10 or 12 pages and you hit a wall and you're like, where do I go now? I should not do this. I should have a different job and all that stuff, But because I was on what it felt like a deadline, every time I got to 10 or 12 pages, instead of like casting about on social media and being all like, woe is me, I'm a writer, all that, the romantic pose and everything, the tragic stuff, I would just pull a piece of my life story out and put it on the page and change the names, And so that first novel, The Fast Red Road, like every few pages, there's a scene from my life. And I'm like, wow, this is really weird. And that's how I like pulled along through that novel. Because I had no idea how to write a novel. You never know how to write a novel. You really never figure it out either, I don't think. But that became my model for how to write novels. So every one of my novels after that, instead of hitting 10 or 12 pages and wondering what to do, I just put a piece of my life down, So I know that like Growing Up Dead in Texas has a character named Stephen Graham Jones, and he seems to have my parents and my house and my life, But still, for me, Demon Theory is much more autobiographical than Growing Up Dead in Texas. And Demon Theory involves gargoyles from the sky swooping down and taking people, and all kinds of craziness going on in that book. And The Only Good Indians to me is highly autobiographical. And so is Night of the Mannequins. It's really autobiographical. Everything. That's the only way I know how to do it. And I always think it's just lack of imagination. Like someday I'll grow up and be a writer who can make stuff up, But for the time being, I'm just going to keep smuggling my own life in and changing the names around, and trying to hide people. But like with Growing Up Dead in Texas, I had this like list on notebook paper where I drew a line in the middle and I had character names on one side and the names of the actual people they were on the other side. So that the people in my life from growing up back home in West Texas, they wouldn't see themselves on the page and get mad because I didn't have permission to tell their stories. And so then it came out and people would call me from back home. They say, "Hey, this is good, but did Pete give you permission to say that?" And I was like, "How did you know that was Pete?" And they said, "It's because you called him Pete." And I realized I'd gone off the wrong side of the page. You know?
Oh, no.
Oh my God, that's funny.
But wow. No, it's all autobiography. Even the drive-through urinal one, that's just a distillation of all. I've had so many bad jobs. Like I was a night janitor at the biggest daycare in Texas. I've been a field hand, warehouses. I've worked on roofs. I've worked on roads. I've done so many, jobs. And instead of cycling through like 50 jobs I've had, I just distilled them all into working the window at a drive-through urinal. And so for me, that kid working the window is me. And yeah, he's 16. The kid in here is 16. So many of my characters seem to be 16 or 17, and I don't know what's up with that. People ask me what's up with that, and I don't really have an answer. I don't know. Maybe it's not for me to say. I don't know.
That's a great story. And I was going to ask you about Night of the Mannequins, because that comes out September 1st, right?
Yeah.
Well, dolls, mannequins, all that sort of thing just freaks my wife the hell out. So I'm like, in line for the digital copy of that book the day it comes out. Here, Danielle, read this. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you.
What's a just spoiler-free synopsis of Night of the Mannequins?
Night of the Mannequins is there's these friends who find a mannequin when they're like 12 years old, and they're living in Rockwell, Texas, and they play with him all summer. He's their best friend. Then they grow up and they leave him behind until they're 16, and they need to play a prank on a theater manager. So they play a prank on the theater manager using Manny, the mannequin. But at the end of their prank, Manny gets up and walks out of the theater, and everything changes, and a lot of people start dying.
Yeah, that'll freak her out.
More justice.
Exactly.
Hey, Steven, I don't want to spoil this, even though it's been out for 50, 70 years or whatever. But remember that Ray Bradbury story about the guy that's hanging? And I'll go ahead and spoil it. At the end, the cops figure out that it's just a mannequin, and they're like, "So do we feel better about this or worse?"
I don't remember that. I think I read all.
Yeah, I don't remember the title though.
Yeah. Oh wow.
So yeah, so you're a big Ray Bradbury fan then?
Yeah, I like his short stories. His novels don't really do it for me, but I like his short stories.
I'm exactly the same way, except for Fahrenheit 451. I love that.
Yeah, Fahrenheit. You're right. Fahrenheit 451 is really good, but like Bradbury, it's like when he goes novel length, it's like I don't know what do they say. It's like drinking from a fire hose. The prose is so lyrical and dense, combined with his amazing imagination, that it overpowers me, and I just feel like it knocks me over. But I can take him for like 12 pages at a time and be completely impressed. And I just love his, he's one of those writers who never lost his, like, I don't know what you call it, his innocence, his wonder, and he infects the reader with that. And I really appreciate that a lot. And I wish I could give that to readers myself, but there's a lot of decapitations in my stuff, so I don't know if they get that same feel,
Yeah, it's like, I know I'm supposed to like dandelion wine, but I just don't,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I love the hell out of short
There's
stories.
not enough decapitations.
That's true. Tim Wagoner, he was tweeting the other day. Apparently there's a section on Netflix called Highbrow Horror. Did you guys see this? Tim's tweet. So I guess my question is, what's highbrow horror and what's lowbrow horror? And I think I tweeted back, it's the people who admit to reading Shirley Jackson but not Richard Lehman. Maybe that's highbrow horror. So
yeah. I don't know. I mean, Paul can probably answer this better than I can, and John can too, and all y'all.
It's a joke question. No.
Yeah, no, but like when people say, what do they there's another word they say, like elevated horror. They say elevated horror, don't they? And or they'll say literary horror. Yeah, literary horror. And to me, I mean, it's basically a compliment if any of that ever gets laid on your own stuff. Of course, they're trying to be nice, but it always kind of hurts me a little bit because it's insulting everything else. And I don't like to talk bad about the rest of horror, because it does come down to taste. It's really what you're saying is, I like this, and I want to give myself a reason to like this, so I'm going to say it's elevated, because we're supposed to spit on horror. We're supposed to not like horror because it's lowbrow or whatever people say.
Yeah.
But lowbrow, that's an insult to Neanderthals. We shouldn't insult them either. So.
Yeah, I'm going to protest this. Yeah, I got to say, and then I'll get out of the way and let other people talk to you. But it's just, it's just a fascinating insight into your mind and into your writing process and everything. I'm just really enjoying listening to you talk. Seriously.
Well, thank you.
Not like Paul. We don't want to hear him.
Right, exactly.
I want to hear Paul.
No, he's just going to go on about the pickle Pepsi thing. Come on, you know that.
Yeah,
I wonder.
Talk about a coincidence.
Do you think people are homemaking? Are they homemaking that pickle Pepsi too? I guess you can do that, can't you? That would be terrible.
This is just everything wrong with the world.
To get it in the bottle.
Could we go back to the decapitations
and yeah. Yeah. So, what if it's all right, Paul, do you have any more questions for Stephen on those two?
No, I don't think so. All the stuff I wrote down.
Yeah.
Got answered.
Well, so I think you have a book coming out, right?
Yeah, I do.
Hey, do you have hard copies yet? Do you have hard copies? Can you?
I don't, and I've seen people pictures of them. I mean, I just have the ARC still.
Yeah.
I don't have a hard copy.
Yeah.
I would just add briefly to what Stephen was saying. Elevated. I hate the term. I'll use the term literary horror, but I'll try to preface it by saying it's a mashup of two genres, and I'm not using literary as a measure of quality. It's literary fiction as a genre. It's I mean, if you're going to describe literary fiction briefly, it's fiction that puts character and maybe theme or other parts of the writing over plot. Is how I think of literary fiction. So if I ever say literary horror, I feel like I'm talking about two mixes of genres, just like you would say, science fiction horror or fantasy horror. Highbrow, lowbrow. I agree; those aren't helpful terms.
I just really can't believe there's an actual section on Netflix called that. Wow.
Oh, there's sections on Netflix.
And you've explored them all, Langan.
Well, horror has a lot of baggage with a lot of people. I mean, whether it's the mainstream people who don't like horror, who think the worst of it, and even people within horror, we want to be taken more seriously as artists. I can certainly claim to falling into that trap from time to time. It's
I do think that it seems to me that the distinction maybe that's being or that's being forgotten here is that literary is an adjective. So that there were, there's literary realist fiction. There's also trashy realist fiction, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not sure. It's like either Calvino or Nabokov who says the literary is that which we are always rereading, and that's kind of like that's like my preferred. There were some things, that Pet Sematary I've read and reread and reread and reread. And so by that definition, that's literary. I mean, maybe you could try to parse it a little bit and say are you rereading it the same way that you order your Big Mac at McDonald's, because you're going to get the same thing every time and that's what you want, or is it like going to a really good hamburger place where you're like, oh, let's see what they're going to give me this week, and I think I prefer the second one, but I think that. I'm as insecure as anybody, and there's that you get into those situations where it's not just the horror crowd, but it's the wider crowd, and you're like, oh man, you want to be able to say literary horror or elevated horror or but it's understandable. I think but I think it's.
I'm going to blame movies for elevated though. I mean, I've only heard elevated reference to movies from critics, especially, or Stephen. I know you're probably at the point where I know you are. People talk to you about potentially optioning things or have optioned things, and you'll hear a producer or someone just say elevated horror. Are we telling the story up on stilts? Is elevated horror?
Stephen, I can see what you mean about it almost being an insult to if someone says that, because there's this sense, I think, when people say things like that no, now this horror writer, he's graduated to literary horror, which I think is bullshit.
Yeah.
So
I think it is. And I think also that when a literary writer comes to write horror, they always say that writer is slumming, they're coming down. It's a hierarchy, it's a ladder, and that always hurts. But like John was saying, Nabokov or whoever says literary is that which you can reread. Well, I initially learned the term literary from reading, I think, the critic Robert Skulls, who says something very similar. He says literary is that what you can return to and unpack even more over and over, and get more from each time. And I agree that's a workable definition. But I agree with Paul. I think if you can think of it as a mashup, literary plus horror, that's a better way to do it than thinking of it as an adjective, because then it does create a hierarchy, like we graduated to writing elevated literary, whatever kind of horror. And
yeah, but you know what? If I can, I'm going to take a chance here and push back just a little bit, if I may. It's also what you can fall in the trap is it's not helpful to say there's not good writing and not bad writing, that it's all just the same, right? So, for instance, you read Paperbacks from Hell, right? Grady Hendrix. So all of these paperbacks, a lot of these I'm 49, so I grew up reading a lot of these. And most of these books are more known for their covers than their literary quality. But they were great fun. Then. I loved them, right? But I would say that, when this ended, perhaps say the early 90s, it was, 10 years later, say the early 2000s, we began to see this resurgence in horror, and the writing in the 21st century is, and I'm going to use the word literary, it's much better quality than these paperbacks that Grady has talked about in his book, right? So, it's very interesting to me to see, as I've grown older, my discernment perhaps has gotten a little bit sharper on between what's perhaps good writing and what's bad writing, despite acknowledging that it can be very subjective. But, I would say this is not the same as this. How did we get from this to this in 10, 20 years? What happened?
For those listening later, you held up Paperbacks from Hell and then Stephen's book. So
yeah,
one of Stephen's.
Yes. Right. So, but, using that old adage from, the Battle of Iwo Jima, where uncommon valor was a common virtue, I would say now, at least for horror, exceptional writing is no longer the exception. The list goes on and on for just excellent horror writers, whether it's Stephen, Paul, John, Laird Barron, Christy DeMeester, Olivia Llewellyn, Victor LaValle. I mean, you could just... the people you could talk about during this age there's a handful. There was always the Stephen Kings, the Peter Straubs, the Thomas Ligotis. Yes, you had some really great writers back then, but by and large, they were, I think, the exception to most of this that was put out during this horror boom. Whereas now, I can't even list everybody who's a fantastic writer now. Something has changed in terms of the writing. So, and I don't want to call it highbrow, and I don't, but nevertheless, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we ought to be able to admit that something is different, and what happened, a great thing happened, and I don't know how we got to this point. But so many great writers are now in the genre, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
If I can propose like one possibility, I don't know if there's an explanation, but back in the time of those paperbacks Grady's talking about, that was when the market. Well, it was the same as the slasher boom. There would be like 16 new slasher movies every Friday. And the same way with the pulp horror market back then, everybody was throwing a dart trying to hit that $1 million bullseye, and there was a lot of darts in the air. And then the market collapses in the early 90s. And then I think, probably about a decade later, we kind of horror switched to the indie model mostly. And in the indie model, there's a different relationship between the writer and the market. I think the writer is able to go and do what she or he wants to do rather than what the market demands. And I think that resulted in a different type of writer coming up. I don't know a different quality, but a different type, a different set of fascinations or something. I think that a lot of the writers, Paul, me, and John included, we kind of started out indie and then we went elsewhere, and it's not it's not graduating or like any kind of ladder. I don't think of it like that.
So it's called selling out. We're trying to sell out.
yeah. But it's our roots are in different places than were the roots of the writers 30 years ago. I feel like, I don't know, but that doesn't necessarily answer what you're talking about. Caliber of writing. Maybe somebody else has a better answer.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I don't know if you're being entirely fair. Just based on that sample of books, that Grady had. I do think that for as much as we bemoan like how horror might be viewed upon now, I mean, 30 years ago, it was totally viewed as like bottom rung sort of genre. So there was sort of like a formulaic expectation. But at the same time, I mean, The Auctioneer by Joan Sampson, I believe, which is featured in that book, is an amazing book, and the writing quality to that it's beautiful. I would say the same for Kit Reed and Clive Barker. So and Stephen Gregory's The Cormorants is one of my favorite books ever. Published in the mid '80s. Granted, those weren't right, and those weren't necessarily bestsellers. But I think people would say the same thing about our books. I mean, ours aren't necessarily bestsellers. Just I think we're all sort of in the middle of it. Like we're in the community, we know of it. I think a big part of it is that, especially writers our age, when I'm pointing at Stephen and John and myself and everybody else, I guess of the sort of the Gen X, we grew up reading that stuff. So, I think because we did, that stigma attached to horror wasn't there. Like I never felt like a horror story had to be one thing. I didn't feel like it had to be a Paperbacks from Hell. Like, oh, a horror story could be this. It could, it could go into something else. So, I mean maybe, I don't want to say it's necessarily because the writing's better, because I'm not going to say that. But I think maybe like writers today feel like an ability to be a little bit more free and open to mess around with horror, I guess, as opposed to maybe following like a human.
Something I wonder about, and I have not made any kind of like systematic study of this, but just that the writers that, like, I think you're right that the three of us and Laird and so on, we all grew up reading Stephen King and Clive Barker and that, and like, just to take King as an example, like King's work it is that mashup that Stephen was talking about, where on the one hand he talks about as a kid discovering his father's collection of H.P. Lovecraft stories, right, and that like blows his mind. Same thing happens to Ramsey Campbell. Reads H.P. Lovecraft and declares he's the greatest writer who ever lived. But then, like in both cases, they read these other writers. So King talks about like John D. MacDonald. He talks about this novel that John D. MacDonald wrote called The End of the Night. And Ramsey Campbell reads Graham Greene. And he reads Nabokov. And so like, and Peter Straub is the same thing. He's reading Lovecraft and he's reading Henry James. So that like all of their work like comes out of this kind of mashup in the sort of blender of their psyches. And I think that a lot of people, a lot of the Gen X writers, I think have done something similar. They grew up reading Stephen King and Clive Barker and whoever else, but then they're also reading these other writers as well. And so like someone like Laird, right, is reading Stephen King and that, but he's also reading Rogers Lasney and Martin Cruz Smith and Cormac McCarthy, and all of that is getting smashed together.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not saying that like I kind of agree with Paul that like I think there were probably more good writers in that Paperbacks from Hell book than that are maybe getting credit for, but I just don't. I don't. So I don't know about them because I feel like I haven't read all of them, But I feel like this sort of current group of writers who are sort of coming to the fore, like that's one of the interesting things about what they're doing is that it's this kind of smashing together of again as King and Straub did, smashing together all these really interesting kinds of things and sort of seeing what happens. So as Paul said, you don't feel a horror story has to be one thing because you're like, well, but wait a minute, and in Jaws it was different now. But
yeah, with Gen X writers, it seems to me as a reader that okay, they read horror, but they've also, like Laird, he also read Zelazny, and you're right, they're mashing it all together.
Any good art, my younger son is a very talented guitarist, and he's right now I'm listening to an awful lot of things I never listened to when I was a kid, So, we're listening to like Black Sabbath or something, like Ozzy era Black Sabbath, and it's all these different like musical, like all these different musical forms and styles and all that go into the pot, and and like my mom will come, my 80-something-year-old mother will come and listen to him playing some of this stuff, and she'll be tapping her foot along, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's got a rhythm to it that like she probably grew up with when she was a kid, you know.
Yeah. Well,
talking about those books that Grady talks about in there, I agree that there probably are a lot of good writers in there. Like Grady mentions Ken Greenhall's Elizabeth, which is an amazing novel. So that guy just had the knack for what to say and what not to say, you know. But yeah, a lot of that stuff in there is disposable, but I think it's easy to dismiss how difficult it is to write something disposable, you know. And I really like Philip K. Dick doing 4 or 5 books a year, you know. Lots of his stuff he wrote it to be disposable, but all the same, I read it now and it's just so real and sincere, you know. And I mean, I don't know, writing, like I remember in grad school, the kind of fantasy that we all inculcated was, if I graduate and I can't find a job, I'm just going to write a thriller like John Grisham and get rich. But it's not that easy, you know. It's not easy to write commercial fiction at all, and it's a really wonderful skill set to have. And I'm not sure how you do it. I mean, I'm not. Maybe hopefully my stuff is disposable. I think some of my stuff is super disposable, you know. but it's a real talent to write, to understand what the market like is hungry for and be able to produce something quickly enough that fits it before it's gone. You know, I think that's a real talent that not a lot of people have, you know?
So like a Tom Clancy novel as opposed to War and Peace or Red Badge of Courage, right? Something commercially.
Yeah.
I suppose it's probably different for everyone. So.
Yeah, I think so.
So Paul, you
speaking of disposable for Paul.
I wasn't gonna go there.
I was kidding.
So Survivor Song comes out on July 7th, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so and I know you've got this feeling, and you've said in interviews or that you feel bad that you've written this pandemic novel and it's coming out July 7th, you know, which you know, it's not like the pandemic comes out and Paul Tremblay's like, I got to jump on this train really quickly.
Yeah.
You know,
that's totally what happened. Actually.
Yeah.
Let me be the first to say.
Well, you know, first of all, you're not the only writer coming out with pandemic novels right now. I mean, there's The End of October, which is out now, April 21st, by Lawrence Wright. It's about a devastating virus that begins in Asia before going global. You know. Okay, that's weird. And then I interviewed Daniel Krauss, who is, you know, typed with George Romero while he was alive, and wrote this in collaboration, somewhat posthumously with George Romero, The Living Dead. And I believe now, because of the pandemic, that's been delayed till August. But, you know, here we go, another one. And then... yeah. John, Children of the Fang,
that's all about it's about a snake pandemic, actually.
Right.
Just snake everywhere.
I'll read the shit out of that.
But you know, but Paul, the other thing is you know, and I hear this, a lot of people are watching movies like Contagion and Outbreak and
not me.
Yeah, and a movie called Pandemic, you know, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of them.
Pandemic? Has everyone seen Birdemic, the bird flu one?
No, I haven't.
Sorry, go ahead.
But you know, it seems to me okay. They're doing this for a reason. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe some sort of comfort that even in a fictional way, other people are going through this. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. So I mean, to go back to your first thing, like I don't know, like me wanting to like apologize, I know is lame. But that was just my own personal fear reaction to the first few weeks of quarantine. I mean, I literally, like when we in Massachusetts went on. You know, stay at home or shelter at home. It was my first 2 weeks, or it coincided with my spring break from school. We got out let out like a day early.
Right.
I'm not exaggerating. I just laid on the couch and watched Mythbusters and Animal Planet and the Zoo Show for 2 weeks, just because I couldn't. You know, I would check my phone, but I wouldn't watch like live news. I would get news in print, but I don't know. I couldn't handle it. I certainly wasn't, you know, clamoring to read The Stand as some people were, and that was just like a lot of my own personal reaction. And some of it was because it wasn't the story of the book per se, but it was how I wrote the book, which was with a lot of help from my sister. I hate doing research, and she was a big help. She's a nurse at a big city, one of the biggest hospitals in Boston. So when I was writing the book in 2018 and 2019, she got me like her hospital's emergency plans, and we talked about. And one of the big things we talked about was her experience in 2014 when it was an Ebola outbreak, in Africa, and then we had some patients and some people get infected in the U.S. and people were freaking out.
Right.
And her hospital was going to be the one in Boston that was going to take patients. And the first communiques that she got from the hospital wasn't how am I going to put this? wasn't confidence inspiring. Let's say. Luckily. So that's where which I put in the book, like talk of PPE and, stuff I'd never heard of. She was talking about how the initial response to the hospital was be like, oh, we're not going to have enough PPE. You may have to double gown up and duct tape your sleeves for Ebola. Thankfully we didn't get a lot of Ebola patients in the US and, and even the hospital itself came to its senses and how it would deal with it. But, so unfortunately she got a preview of what sort of was to come, with COVID. So a lot of that was just here's a book I wrote that my sister really helped me with, and now she's in the middle of it, and I just couldn't stop thinking about that.
Yeah, it's scary, and I'm in Texas, and we're really at the forefront right now because of some bad decisions made by leadership here. It's not very confidence inspiring. It's scary.
No, so, and I mean. Yeah. For that part of the book where I reference poor government response, I mean, honestly, that wasn't that hard to predict. It didn't take Kreskin to realize that if something like this were to happen with the current administration, that would be a total shit show.
Yeah.
If anything, I sort of underestimated how much of a shit show it would be.
Well, what's a spoiler-free synopsis of your book?
Sure. So there's an outbreak of a super rabies-like virus in Massachusetts. So it's not a global pandemic. It's really sort of localized to Massachusetts. It's where it began. I don't tell you how it happened or where it started, or I don't tell you the why, where the virus came from. But it's in Massachusetts, and it's essentially real rabies, but the timeline of infection has moved up. If with real rabies, if you're bitten on the arm, it would probably take a few weeks before the virus passes through your brain. So in my book, it takes maybe an hour. And once the virus passes through your brain, there's no cure. And that's real life rabies as well. This is just an absolutely horrifying, interesting virus. There really are no other viruses like it because it's not in the blood system. There's no blood test for rabies. It attaches to a nerve and slowly crawls up the nerve until it goes to your brain. So anyway, there's this outbreak of super rabies. And really the main part of the book is 4 to 6 hours. I try to do it in real time, essentially, the time that would take you to read it. There's 4 to 6 hours in the life of Natalie Larson. She's 8.5 months pregnant. In the very beginning of the book, her husband and she are attacked by an infected neighbor. Her husband is killed and she's bitten. And so she seeks the help from her, one of her best friends, Dr. Romola Sherman, who's a pediatrician close by. And so most of the book is 4 to 6 hours with Romola and Natalie as they try to get help, as they try to navigate, society sort of, freaking out and breaking down for those 4 to 6 hours.
Right. One reviewer said that it's a lot of the book centers around the question, what would you do for the ones that you love? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess, my 3 prior novels were about families and different forms of crisis, and it had an ambiguous supernatural element. So I wanted to try to go away from that, at least for one book. I'll go back to that in the next book. So, I decided I wanted to focus on a friendship, which I really hadn't done at novel length anyway. And it really was challenging, but it was also a lot of fun. I really enjoyed, which might be kind of weird to say, I enjoyed the time I spent with Romola and Natalie, and friendships in particular, obviously, I mean, this might sound trite, but, so different than, familial relationships, because you have no choice, obviously, with your family. I mean, you have a choice. You can choose not to talk to them or not to see them, but you're bound to some sort of relationship, whether it's strained or not.
Right.
With friendships, these are relationships by choice, and how they change over time, or how they get strong, how they can be really intense for a time, and maybe, you don't see that person for a little while after that, and then you pick it up. So I mean, Romola and Natalie had this, history of being, super close friends in college and still friends as adults, but, maybe not as close or hadn't been as close until they were thrown back into this. I don't know. When I write, I always, I try to build my characters by asking them really hard questions and see what they're going to do. So, poor Romola especially has some really tough moral questions that come up in the novel that she has to grapple with. And, I hope, and all her choices are definitely not right, maybe not right in terms it doesn't work out, or also maybe not right because it might not be the moral choice for society in general. But I kind of hoped and thought like all her choices were very human.
Yeah, she has you're right. She has like her moral system, and she has like medical ethics, and then she has like personal obligation, or what she feels is personal obligation. And that's like tearing her up on the inside as she runs through this crazy, crazy day,
No, and honestly, like, to go back to like why I was freaked out, like personally, like I felt like when things were, in the U.S. with the coronavirus, like my son was in college in California, and we were talking to him for a week or two before, they closed down the hospital. Like, we're talking to him on Zoom like 10 days before, and he's got a cough. And I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Like 10 days later, he still has a cough. And, Lisa and I are talking. He's like, well, should he get tested? And you couldn't get a test really then. And she's like, we're like, well, if he gets tested, they keep him there. He's not, what are we going to do? Like, I mean, so we were like, he's probably fine. He's, had this cough and he's no fever, get on the plane, just stay away from people, get him home. And like, even when he was home, like I'm ashamed as an adult, as his parent, like when he first came home, like when I picked him up from the hospital, like I was like leaned over to my open car window, like just because I was afraid, he might have it. I was super happy to have him home, but
well, the thing is,
like
as
the fucked up headspace that you get put into in that situation.
Yeah. As a parent, you want to be healthy though, in case if your child is sick, it doesn't do him any good if you're sick. So
I don't know. So like after like it was weird as the writer writing like about Romola's like choices that she has to make, and just to have like a small, it wasn't life and death obviously, but just the small version of that was, it was hard to take.
Yeah, I've often thought if I'm in a situation like anything like this where I have to choose between my wife and son and the rest of the planet, Danielle and I have talked about this, just conversation. I've said things like, well, I'd murder the entire world to save you guys, which is not really a moral thing to say, but as a parent and as a husband, you feel that way. So,
Well, it's funny. I have my character, Natalie, and this isn't much of a spoiler. I really didn't want to have like, she's a pregnant woman, so I didn't write from her point of view very much. Like, it's mostly from Romola's point of view, because, I didn't want to be like, I'm not going to write from a pregnant woman's point of view and tell you what it's like to be a pregnant woman. And I was also very aware of the horror trope, or maybe it's more science fiction trope, is the woman, you got to save the pregnant woman because she's going to repopulate the world, kind of thing, in an apocalyptic story. So I have Natalie, which I hope felt like very honest, especially for people or parents out there. Like, you love your kids, but, she's talking about how, I told my husband, no, I come first. You save me. You don't save the kid first. You save me. I want to live. While she's sort of in this situation. I also hope like readers would think that was sort of like an honest and maybe, connected to Natalie.
I mean, it's a very fearful situation. If you imagine it really happening, which isn't hard to do today. You can imagine someone thinking that way. So.
Yeah. And talking about this novel it scares me, or it like reactivated a rabies paranoia I have, especially hearing you talk about that now. There's no blood test. I'm like, oh crap, I'm like years ago, like this probably
sweet dreams tonight, Stephen.
So yeah, no. I was driving down the road in the country, and I saw this big old dog loping in the ditch. And so I stopped and tricked him into my cab, and I thought we were going to go have great adventures. But then for the next half mile, he was just attacking me and biting me, and so then I dove out of the car, and he went the other way, and I thought, that's good, we're broken up. But then I thought, I've definitely got rabies, because one of my brothers had to get rabies shots, and I know that's terrible. And so then I was hunting that season with one of my cousins who's he's in the medical field, and I kept asking him, like every time we'd have a down moment, I'd ask him about rabies symptoms. And finally he just said, do you think you have rabies? And I said, no, why do you ask that? But I totally thought I had rabies, But I finally didn't turn up with rabies for the next year, so I thought I was safe. But then Paul's novel makes me start thinking it all over again, you know? So now I'm going to be asking nurses and friends I have if maybe I have rabies.
No matter.
It actually could take 1 to 2 years. But I think
oh,
you're okay.
Oh, good. Oh, I feel better.
No matter what success you have with this novel, Paul, you're a success because you scared the hell out of Stephen.
Well, I will say, this is for Stephen because he always ends up in some strange situations. For anyone, if you ever wake up like with a bat flying in your bedroom, like you were asleep and there's a bat in the room, you can't fuck around.
No.
Because you're not going to find where the bat bit you. You have to go get rabies shots. Because if the bat bit you, its teeth are too small, you're not going to see it.
Yeah.
And the biggest vector in the U.S. for rabies to human is bats currently. So, yeah. If you see the bat come in, that's one thing. But if you wake up and it's in there, nope, you got to get rabies shots. And they're not as bad as, when we were kids, we're like, oh, you got to get them in the stomach. And no, they're like regular shots or like booster shots.
What if the bat and turns into Dracula? How does that work on the whole rabies thing?
Right after Danielle and I got married, this was 96, our very first house we rented from her brother-in-law who lived just up the street. It's this big house, nice house, we were renting it. And then from Danielle's point of view, one night she hears me go, I'm running up and down the stairs like this, and there's bats all over Cedar Rapids where we lived. And she's like, did someone break into the house and everything? I was like, I'm running to the bedroom. I'm like, shut the door, get a towel. I woke up to this bat flying out of the chimney, when I was sitting there watching a movie.
Have any of you ever been to Austin, like in the late spring, early summer, the Congress Street Bridge? There's a huge urban colony of bats. And when it hits dusk, they all fly out. And so I've been there. There's every evening when this happens, you go down, you just find a place, you camp out near the bridge, and you just wait for the bats to leave.
Oh yeah, it was every single night in this part of Cedar Rapids without fail. They were all flocking around the trees, and I was just like, I'm going inside.
Now I want Stephen's bat novel. When's that coming?
I want to. It was a bat that bit Cujo, right? And turned the dog Cujo into the killer. I'd like to write a novel, a part 2 to that, where a bat bites like some person and that person turns into Cujo. I think that'd be great. If it doesn't just to give them rabies, it gives them Cujo. That would make me really excited.
Paul, did you read Rabid, The History of Rabies?
I did.
I read that too.
That's a frightening book because there are elements of rabies, there's this kind of, sexual component that totally threw me off. I didn't realize that was a part of it. And rabies is just much more than driving you mad. There's so many other frightening aspects of this disease. It's terrifying.
For our viewers out there, this is a rare problem. Okay? No, you probably don't have rabies.
Matt's a medical doctor, so.
I was going to say, listen to the doctor.
The funny thing is I listened to the audiobook, probably 2 to 3 years before I even thought of doing Survivor's Zone. And like the original what if of the novel, I can't give you the what if because it spoils the book, but I was I started thinking about like horror tropes because, Cabin I sort of played with the home invasion trope, and Head Full of Ghosts was, obviously exorcism. I was like, zombie? I'm like, I don't know if I could do a zombie. No, I started in the what if I wrote down plus the rabies instantly occurred to me. It's like, I could try to like make, even though they're not really zombies, try to make it somewhat realistic, or like, how you could come close to having it. I don't know. I suppose like I'm sure someone's already done it, like the zombie ant fungus thing would probably be a cool thing to do, but I feel like I can't read any books on that.
Yeah, there's a category on Netflix for that
books.
too.
What's that?
Yeah, there's a category on Netflix for that too.
The girl with with all the gifts.
With the gifts.
Oh, is it? Okay,
yeah. But Paul, what's kind of interesting, right, is that Survivor's Song, like when we were first talking about it, like the way that it struck me was, all right, so here's like Paul's take on the zombie, or the fast zombie, or whatever. But now because of COVID, it seems much more a plague novel. Like even though, so it's kind of interesting to me that it's like the novel itself engages, I think, in a lot of ways, certain certain tropes that you find in I think in zombie fiction, like being bitten and what am I going to do and can I and all this kind of stuff, the race against time and such, and you know the sort of frightening the way that the zombies mirror even they both cause and mirror this kind of collapse in society. But now, because of the way everything's changed, we're discussing it as a pandemic novel. So I find that kind of interesting, you know, that it's
yeah, and that's really like it's funny because I went into the book saying, okay, I'm going to write this thing that's going to touch on zombies. The two things I didn't want to do, like to try to be somewhat different, because there have been so many better books and stories that have done the take on, like, I didn't want to have a cast of thousands. I really wanted to, focus in on a couple of people. Obviously, there's a few side characters, but and I also didn't want like a loving, detailed description, almost fetishistic end of the world. Like, we've all seen like that, things destroyed and what it looks like in the aftermath. At one point in the novel, like, and I don't mind saying this, like I tell the reader, this is not the end of the world. It's not even the end of Massachusetts. Eventually, I don't say things get back to normal, but eventually, the virus is somewhat contained. And to me, I felt like that made the story, I hope it makes the story a little bit more, poignant, sad, scary, because for, the characters who don't make it, I feel like that's more tragic, because if they could have just somehow held on for, another 2 or 3 weeks, then maybe they get to survive too.
And yet there's that kind of brilliant set piece in the middle of it. Stephen knows what I'm talking about, and everything just goes to hell in this, but in a very localized kind of way, which seems just depressingly like yes, that's exactly, like it's so realistic, if you will, in terms of the attitudes of the people who are involved in it, that yeah, it's like it could have shown up on my news feed. Idiots, local idiots do stupid things.
Yeah.
I just thought of something. You're going on how like the person gets the virus and it alters their behavior, and therefore you respond to the behavior. Okay, so like the virus is basically controlling the environment in this setting. There's actually a book called Parasite Rex about how parasitism is maybe more common than, say, even just being a regular plant or an animal. It's more common that there are parasites. Like everything has its own panorama of strange parasites, and when the parasites get inside the organism, they affect how it behaves, which changes the whole ecosystem. Like, why is the predator getting this animal? It's because that animal is being forced to slow down by the pheromones released by the parasite, which it actually is trying to get into its final host, the lion. It sounds very much like what's driving the context here is the virus is looking for its next host.
Great. Rabies and now parasites.
Imagine that without being teleological about it.
Rabies and now parasites, Matt. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
I just thought it was pretty interesting, and would sort of fit in the idea that this whole thing was driven, like you have this human musing on what they're doing, but the whole thing was driven by behavior caused by a non-conscious particle.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to touch on something,
John.
John.
Somewhere, like, really quickly, didn't I read, like, the cat scratch fever, that, is it a bacteria? Like they were figuring out that it was, when it was infecting people, it was actually changing their thought processes.
Yeah, toxoplasmosis.
Yeah, toxoplasmosis. Yeah.
Well, and no, we're not even the ultimate host of the Toxoplasma protozoan. The cat is. So we're a dead end. So the for humans getting Toxoplasma, we're a dead end. And so, although there are behaviors that are changed by getting toxoplasmosis for humans, it's not nearly as profound as the effect it would have on a cat.
Right. If you get toxoplasmosis, you start craving that pickle Pepsi.
All right, Mike, why didn't you take out the garbage? Well, I think there's a parasite, I want to touch on something John said about
That can't be right.
Yeah, looking at your novel Survivor Song in the context of a pandemic, as opposed to okay, this is Paul's take on zombies. It's interesting. Just the other day, Daniel Krause's publisher, she emailed me again. She's like, coincidentally or sadly or whatever, something along that line. Daniel's book is coming out in August, and it's this pandemic zombie novel. She started looking at it that way too, which it is. So, every zombie story is really.
Yeah, I read. Paul, I don't remember what month we were trading novels, but I read this well before the pandemic, and for me, it was Paul's take on a zombie novel. But like John was saying, it is neat. I think this just goes to prove that whatever Paul writes, everybody's going to read it and interpret it now. they're gonna force Paul to be talking about whatever is happening now. Or they're going to force that interpretation anyway. So, which is good. That means he's got everybody's eyes and everybody's minds.
Speaking,
I'm writing a Teletubbies story next. I'm going to be nice and happy.
I can't wait.
Have you seen the black and white? The people take the Teletubbies and make them black and white and kind of slow motion. They are terrifying, man.
Because they're supposed to be like 10 feet tall, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know what would be really cool is like you're in a horror movie and there are these happy Teletubbies, but what's showing on their television is what they really want to do to you.
The subtextual tummy.
Hey,
I had kids. I used to know all the Teletubby dances.
Yeah.
Hey, can I ask Paul a craft question?
Sure. Anything you want.
So Paul, this novel happens in a very 4 to 6 hours, and usually in novels we have the luxury of accordioning out and then pressing in, so we get to paraphrase 6 years or something or 2 months or whatever it is. You didn't have that luxury this time. You had to both document nearly every moment while at the same time keeping it exciting and also not straining our credulity. How can exciting things happen back to back to back to back? So what walls did you hit doing that, and how did you get around them or under them or through them?
For me, the hardest part was I would say after the opening, after the prelude, the hardest part was, this isn't a huge spoiler, the friends trying to get to the hospital. And for me, that was the hardest part because I felt like that was where I was trying to weave in the information about the outbreak without being too info dumpy, and some of their relationship. And I was like, God, I can't wait till I get out of the hospital. Once I get out of the hospital, things will be, if not easier, then better. So I don't know, like you said, you're talking about how you're always pulling out scenes from your life. I certainly wasn't that autobiographical with this. What I feel like I do with my characters in the last few books, especially, I don't know. I'm always, there's some part of me that's in each character, or some part of my personality that's in each character. So I'm always peppering them / me, maybe a slightly tweaked me, those kind of questions, or the questions that I'm asking my characters. And I don't know. I kind of felt like with this book, because the time was so short, I kind of felt like even the moments where things weren't crazy happening would be sort of tense because, there's always something coming down the road, or there's the next place they're trying to get to, or is the next sort of almost literal bump in the road at times. I felt like you can sort of drag a reader along a little bit that way with little breaths as opposed to the big accordion breaths. It's funny you say that though, because the last 2 books have been compressed timelines, like Cabin, The End of the World, This. And so the novel I've just started working on now is going to be over 40 years. And I'm having a really hard time. I've documented some stuff that happens in real time. I'm like, oh crap, I'm 50 pages and this is all a couple of events over 2 days. How am I going to do 40 years of this? I have to relearn how to do some compression or some accordioning.
I just wrote 24 of the zombie novel, and now I've got to do it.
Talking about autobiography, though, I did see some of what felt to me like your life or your, I don't know, like you in the treatment, or not the treat. I don't in the if there are 2 kids in this novel, those 2 kids felt to me like kids, Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, just had a huge thunder behind me and the house shook. Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, like I steal, like, those are definitely like amalgams of a couple of my son's friends. Mm-hmm. But it's funny, to go back to the autobiography thing. John and I were on the phone fairly recently talking about like, because, I wrote Cabin, and then I wrote some short stories for Growing Things, which, one of which ended up being really sort of autobiographical, almost like too obviously so. And this book I'm working on now is essentially like, I'm trying to write as like a faux memoir of this other character. But this other character starts off at me and then goes, chooses like something happens that makes a totally different path for this person. And I've been recently reading and rereading some of Jeffrey Ford's most recent fiction, and Jeff's short fiction especially. He's put himself in as characters a bunch of times. He does such a wonderful job with it.
Yeah, he does.
It's funny. It makes me, think about what you were talking about at the beginning, how you wrote like your the first book especially. Like the old saw in publishing is like, the first novel for so many people is like they talk about the sophomore novel curse, the second novel curse, because for most of us, I think the first novel is so heavily autobiographical, and then the second one is like, oh shit, what am I gonna do now? And then you have to figure out that you get to keep picking at yourself for the next book and the book after that. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know if I'm running out of ideas, but I feel like I'm getting more like maybe not this novel, but for a lot of the short stories I've written. And for this book that I'm working on now, I'm leaning way more into obvious autobiography. So I don't know if that just means that I'm almost done writing or not.
If I can jump back to something that you said just briefly for the audience. We've had Jeffrey Ford on the show a couple times. Great guy and a really stellar writer, as you said. So if you haven't checked out his work, be sure to do so. I told Jeff that I considered the Shadow Year to be in the same class as Summer of Night and Boy's Life. It's just a very, very it's just in that vein, at least to me. Maybe not anyone else.
It's a wonderful novel.
Yeah, it's terrific. It's really great.
Yeah, so I just wanted to shoot that out, but I want to move on to a couple of things, Paul. But before I do, does John, anyone else, Bridget? I don't want to be accused of making. Melissa's not here, and the one lady here. Well, we didn't let her talk. What if you want to say something? Obviously,
you can. Bastard! I can't believe this,
Mike. That sexist guy. Okay, she's shaking her head no. All right.
She is speechless at your sexist nonsense.
I know, right? My wife says the same thing.
As if you could stop me from talking if I wanted.
No, Bridget, go with this quickly. This is how you're going to take over the
show.
Next week, the Bridget Brenmark Show. No, anyone else want to talk about Survivor Song before I ask Paul a couple questions about his other books? Some comments?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
I've got questions.
He's got answers.
Seriously, one of the things that you say in the book is, this is not a fairy tale, this is a song. And it's a refrain throughout the book. And the first time I read it, I thought, what the hell does that mean? And having finished the book, I'm still like, what the hell? What kind of literary nonsense is this?
Yeah.
So,
he went to his fridge, he has the magnetic words, and he arranged them, and he's like, that's good.
What is it even, so how is it, but I know that music's really important to you. And so, and punk music especially. And so, like, how is that, like, how is it that you understand that? Because obviously readers are going to bring different things to that. But what were the kinds of things that were going into your thinking of it?
It was mostly literary nonsense. No.
Highbrow.
Well, some of it is a little bit of like, I don't want to say sleight of hand, but like some of it is I'm not being truthful totally, because I definitely riff on a lot of fairy tales throughout the book. There are references to Grimm's fairy tales, and even when a human in the book succumbs to the infection, when the virus passes through the brain and they're fully infected, they speak English, or they speak in language. It sounds like nonsense, but what they're saying are actually lines from Grimm's fairy tales. It may be jarbled a little bit, but some of them should be recognizable. So I thought that was, just, I don't know. Sometimes I do shit like that just to entertain myself. Like, oh, that's kind of fun. I'm telling them that it's a song, not a fairy tale, and there's some fairy tale trappings, like even like the prelude, interlude, and postlude. In the U.S. version, actually, I think in the UK version too, they make it look like an old storybook sort of font, which is kind of fun. But for me, song, like my favorite songs. I mean, I like a lot of different kinds of songs, but the ones that I always sort of go back to are the ones that I can listen to no matter what mood I'm in. I had a musician friend tell me, and I didn't believe him at the time. He's like, at any one point in your life, you can only like 11 songs. He said. Like, that's it. Because, like, it'll change every day or even every hour. Like, but there are 11 songs that you could put on at that moment that you would like, but there are others that you wouldn't. So, I mean, I don't know if 11 is the right number, but I always thought that was kind of interesting. So when I think about, like, my favorite songs, these are the songs that I would never skip over if they came on. My favorite ones tend to be, because John mentioned punk music, loud, fast, angry, and a weird mix of, like, hopeful and melancholy at the same time. Like, because the song is over so short. Like, I mean, there's always that melancholy feeling afterwards. Like, oh, that was great, wasn't it? It's over. You listen to it again, but like that moment has passed. Like, even if that's not to say I don't listen to the same song like 4 times in a row, but if I do, each time I listen to it, it's a little bit different. So some of it was just sort of like this, I wanted the speed of the story to feel that way. I wanted sort of that mix of, hope and melancholy too.
That's really interesting. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, John.
I wanted to bring in actually a short story that you wrote, which I don't know if other people in the listening audience or the viewing audience will have read. It's a story called The Last Conversation, which was an Amazon original, right? Yeah. And I don't want to spoil that, except to say that one of the things that it seems to me there is a distant connection between you can sort of you know where I'm going with that. Yeah. What I was thinking about was that in some ways that's a story, like, it's about mistakes, and like, I don't know why that had never occurred to me before, but like I thought about that and I thought, man, like I kind of like I had this sudden insight that, like, man, I think mistakes are actually really important to Paul's fiction. Like, I think that is something, like, in some fundamental way, he's really interested in mistakes. I mean, look, there's mistakes in every kind of fiction. I'm not, but I thought, there's something, like, I felt like that's, maybe it's not the sole engine that drives your work, but it's like one of the spark plugs or something like that. And I don't know anything about engines. I don't even know if that's the proper comparison, but like, I wondered about that, about the nature of mistakes and the way that mistakes function for you, the way that you think about mistakes.
Wow. Interesting. I think, and I feel like I've learned this in the 3 months, is it going on 4 now, of sort of our crucialized lives, that, because I think it's brought more to the forefront of my brain, is that, I knew I've always dwelled on like worst case scenarios. So like the first couple of weeks, that was hard to think about, but I've found myself, when I think about the worst case scenarios, it could be anything, like doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, and how it just spirals out of control. I don't know. It's just lifelong fear of personal incompetence that I have. I don't know. It's just something that I've always had, or like, I've always imagined, what if I was the one that's so fucked up like that? Like, I'd forgotten about this. This happened when I was 7 years old, until like a month or 2 ago. And I don't know how I remembered thinking about it, but when I was 7 years old, I don't know why we're psychologically breaking down here. When I was 7 years old, my parents put me in a Catholic school. I only lasted 1 year. They pulled me out after second grade. I was miserable, hated it. And then they stopped being Catholic. So it was good timing for me to go back to public school. So they put me in second grade, so the classes were small. And I remember the teacher. It's funny, I don't remember any of the teachers' names, but I remember her name, Mrs. Baker. And she was nice to me. She could tell, like, I was like, the quote unquote sensitive kid, etc. But anyway, she came in one day and she was like, someone peed all over the bathroom floor, and if you had an accident, it's okay. You just have to let us know. You can, tell us privately. And as she was telling the class this, I remember sitting there, and I didn't do it, but I remember sitting there thinking, what if I had done it? What would happen? And apparently, like, I was so visually, obviously freaked out that she called my parents and called me in to ask me, like, hey, it's okay.
Oh, wow.
I was like, I was like, really, I didn't do it. It ended up being like soap too, so then they got pissed. Like it wasn't pee. Someone took the soap and emptied it on the floor. But I don't know. I always remembered that. Like I didn't do it, but I so worked myself up, thinking about the what if or the worst case scenario. And even as a freaking almost 49-year-old adult, I fall into those traps. So I guess maybe I'm trying to do that a lot in my fiction to try to get some of that out.
Yeah.
That mistake thing you're talking about, John, and that you're talking about, Paul. I do see that in Paul's fiction. I think they're like you go from mistake to regret, and then when you're in that dynamic, which we all are all the time, of course, you go back to dissect the moment of the mistake. It's like a recursive thing. You get caught in a loop of going back and back and back. And Mike, to transition, if you're wanting to transition to the other novels, that's like Head Full of Ghosts. That's going back to a moment over and over, just like flaying it instant by instant by instant and trying to extract some truth from it and finding that you can't. You can't go back really. Which is not a question. I should put a question mark on that. Yeah.
No, but you're right. You can do the same thing if you want with Disappearance at Devil's Rock, where there's the fathers, there's the missing father in that who abandoned the family and then was killed, I think, in a vehicle accident. And then there's the question of what happened to Tommy, to the missing character, and there's the revelation ultimately that he was involved in a horrible mistake, just the most ghastly kind of mistake. And there's probably, I don't know. I mean, with Cabin, you can probably do it too. That the little girl at the beginning makes a mistake in talking to a stranger when she knows, she's not supposed to.
It's a Red Riding Hood thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it goes on from there. There's the scene with the trying to get the gun, and if you haven't read the novel, this makes no sense to you. But you think the gun is going to solve all the problems because in these kinds of narratives it does, and it doesn't. It so doesn't.
We're probably giving Paul a complex. Like his characters aren't going to make mistakes anymore. They'll only do the right thing every time. Okay,
so here's the thing. At the end, what's so fascinating about the end of Cabin is that you don't know if they've made a mistake.
Yeah.
That's what drives people insane about. But it's why it's a great novel. Is that it's a novel, and you're just like, wow, and Paul's like, ha 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 ha.
Yeah. Well, and the scary thing about Cabin is that ending, because we don't know, or we like lots of novels at the end of it, you realize that this happened in like a side universe in a made up place. But with Cabin, you think maybe this happened in our world and we're living on the bad side of that mistake. Maybe some people up in Maine or where were they? Vermont? Where they're
New Hampshire. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all made up places to me. But we don't know. We don't know if this really happened or not. Like I can imagine. Sometimes, like especially in 2020, I feel like maybe they made the wrong decision.
Right. The next you turn the page and it's like today David Bowie died, and it's like, oh crap.
Yeah. You mentioned Devil's Rock, John, I think, and I just want to say, Paul, the novels of yours that I've read, I have to say how much I truly, truly enjoyed Disappearance at Devil's Rock.
Oh, thank you.
We've all got these really high to be read piles of books, and then I go find myself going back and rereading Disappearance at Devil's Rock. So I really enjoyed it. Wanted to thank you for it. I also don't know if you've been on the show a couple times, but I don't think we've talked about Growing Things at all, have we?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so Growing Things is your latest collection, which came out, about a year ago? Something like that?
Yeah, and actually, I probably should do a better job of this online too, but the trade paperback edition comes out the same day as Survivor Song.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And so they let me include an essay where I just recommend like 40 or 50 short story collections, write a little paragraph for each one. Mm-hmm. So that's included in the paperback. But yeah, so I guess
good to know. Is that just as for the Kindle readers, is that included in, probably not included in the Kindle, is it?
That's a good question. I think they switch over the Kindle at some point.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know. Actually, I'm not sure.
I'd love to read that. Yeah.
That would be.
Yeah, there's I mentioned Stephen and John. They get their collections mentioned prominently in the essay.
Well,
it cost us both a lot of money. I mean, I think
It did, yeah.
I mean, we were comparing notes, and I was like, nope, it's the same for both. So.
Well, getting back to disappearance just for a second, I'm sorry, but you and I have talked about doppelgangers before, Paul, and I don't want to spoil anything about that novel, but let's just say I loved it that's one of the reasons why I loved it, and then, Lake Placid, you talked about that, Stephen.
Oh,
yeah.
Lake Placid.
Lake Mungo.
Yeah.
I've never seen Lake Placid.
I'm not going to see it.
It would have been better if it was Lake Placid. That would have been awesome. Why did the little boy disappear? Because a giant alligator is living in the lake.
Yeah. If you haven't seen Lake Mungo, talking to the audience, you should. So it's
also Lake Placid.
Alligator is a better alligator movie. Actually, I can't say that because I haven't seen Lake Placid, but Alligator scared me.
Alligator's really good, and Crawl is really good too. But but with Disappearance of Devil's Rock, the thing Disappearance wasn't Paul's second novel, of course. He'd done a lot of novels, but Head Full of Ghosts took over the world, and then to follow it up with a strong novel, a lot of people just mail in whatever they got in a drawer, and to capitalize. But Paul did Disappearance, and it was just as good. That's really hard to do, a 1-2 punch like that. It's really, really difficult.
It certainly felt like I was writing a second novel again, honestly. Because I had written The Little Sleep, and then No Sleep to Wonderland. No Sleep to Wonderland was very hard for me to write. And then, 4 years passed, and I do Head Full of Ghosts. So yeah, I mean, Disappearance of Devil's Rock. I've a weird relationship with that book because it was so freaking hard to write.
Really?
I know that took a chunk out of me, and it wasn't necessarily because of the nature of the story, or maybe it was, but it just felt like it was a hard book to write because most of my prior novels were first person, and this was like a third person sort of many characters, so that was sort of new to me at the novel length. And I was in my own head this doesn't feel like it did when I was writing A Head Full of Ghosts. I don't think this is very good. Actually, one of my favorite bits of advice came when I was struggling with Disappearance of Devil's Rock. I may have mentioned this to some of my friends here, but I wrote an email to Stuart Ornan, who's an amazing writer, amazing guy. And I wrote this big email, it's just not going the same. I don't think it's as good as Head Full of Ghosts. What am I going to do? Blah, blah, blah. Sent it to him. As most writers, we expect, like a comforting email back, hey, you can do it, kind of thing. Mm. And Stuart just sent me one sentence. And he wrote, not everything you write is going to be great. And I read that, and I started cracking up, and that was exactly what I needed to hear. It's he's right. I just felt like a whole, I don't know, 30 PSI just leave my body.
Relaxed you. Yeah. Since you mentioned his name, I have to say that The Night Country is one of my favorite books. To anyone, if you haven't read it, this is like an ode to Ray Bradbury and Halloween, and
that's right.
Teenagers in high school that make a mistake, and in addition, the very first chapter is one of the best openings ever. If you are the Ray Bradbury type of reader and you love this sort of thing, the first chapter is just, I don't want to spoil it, but you just have to read it. So
yeah, the funny, just to because I love the novel too, and I think you're right that it's like Bradbury, but there's a certain restraint about it that I think if you're a reader who feels like, what was it Stephen was saying about the fire hose for 300 pages, he turns that down. It's like a trickle from a hose that you can drink from, and it's an amazing book.
Yeah, it is.
I haven't read that. I'll look that up. I've read some of his other stuff, but I never read The Night Country. I'll look that up.
Stephen, you mentioned you saw my Bradbury back there, and you brought it up. Yeah, you got to read The Night Country then.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Really, man.
Yeah, you'll go through hours.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
nice.
It's great. And that, again, get back to me about that first chapter because I think you'll agree. So, it's funny that you mentioned your essay. I didn't know about this, Paul, but one of the questions I was going to ask you guys to more or less get to the closing is, you know, I'm including John in this too. John, Paul, and Stephen. Do you guys have favorite stories that each other have written? I mean, you're like, I love all John's work, but this is my favorite here. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read anything either of these guys have written. I did a lot of Wikipedia research before I came on here, and there are a bunch of Reddit subthreads I went through.
It's funny because my next question to John was going to be, did you like Survivor Song or The Only Good Indians better? You know,
I can honestly have no idea.
No, but you know, out of each other's
German
work.
Godzilla.
German Godzilla is easily the best thing John has ever done.
It will never be topped.
I would not disagree with you there.
You know, he's the German Godzilla writer. You know what I'm talking about. Sorry, Paul. Go on.
I will jump in for Stephen. So, I mean, my favorite, it's hard to pick a favorite novel, but, you know, Demon Theory turned me on to his work. So Demon Theory definitely holds a strong place in my heart. And there's so many of his, like, it's fun I get to say his early work because he's been publishing for more than 20 years now. Like Leadfeather is probably a book that a lot of horror fans haven't read and they should. You know, it's not saying it's necessarily a horror novel. I mean, there's certainly historical horror in the book, but it's just a wonderful book. And there's basketball in there too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like there is in The Only Good Indians, without spoiling a little bit. For short stories, there are two Stephen stories that always jump to mind. One is Raphael. Like, there's one scene in that story that will never leave my head. It's been imprinted there forever. And I don't want to spoil it. So if you've never read Raphael, you have to read it. And also, Father, Son, Holy Rabbit. Oh man, just total gut punch story. Like, open mouth shock at the horribleness and the beauty of that story by the end of it.
You still there, Stephen? Yeah, there you are. Okay.
Excuse me?
Yeah,
I'm here. You know, for John, I'm trying to pick right now. I think it's what I always call in my head. I've never told John this. I call it his Sleestack story, which is the title story from Children of the Thing. You know,
I'm totally fine with that. Terrifying Sleestack.
No, but it I don't want to give it away, but it makes me question the world I live in, I guess. And I think that's what horror should do. You know, horror should make me question reality and how we navigate it. And for Paul, my favorite story is, I'm probably going to go recent. I think it's that, and I'm going to get the title wrong, Paul. It's the Haunted House Tours, one per. What's the full title? It's got some strike throughs through it.
Yeah, it's lemonade 25 cents is crossed out, and that's Haunted House Tour, one per person. Which that's a totally autobiographical story. That's
Alan
Datlow's Echoes. Thank you.
Yeah, and that story that seems to me just to like distill what it's like to write a horror story. You look at what you're terrified of the most and you put it on the page, you know, and it scares me as well. Maybe it scared you when you wrote it. I don't know, but it scares me.
Really quickly for John, besides obviously The Fisherman being just a flat out great novel.
Yeah.
One of his earlier short story, John doesn't write short stories. Can we say that first?
Yeah, you can.
One of his novelettes or novellas, but How the Day Runs Down. It's just so smart and so lovely and horrifying all at once. And I'll be selfish and say his newest story in Final Cuts, Altered Beast, Altered Me. That's the title, right?
Yep, that is the title.
Yeah, where apparently I am the main character, Gaetan Cornichon.
The main character is someone named Gaetan Cornichon, who bears no resemblance to any people living or dead.
Yes.
That's what the lawyers have told me to say.
Yeah, right. Actually, in Bor Ubus too. Am I saying that title right?
Bor Urus, yeah.
Bor Urus. To me, that and The Fisherman, I think, go together. I don't know if you wrote those two around the same time. I know The Fisherman was sort of long, like you started it, put it away, and then sort of went back to it. But we were talking about companion pieces earlier. Those two, for me, are total companion pieces.
Yeah.
And you know, John, what's your story, John? Of it's a long story, but it's
no kidding.
And the way I remember it is you're in it, but it's a teacher talking to a class.
Technicolor.
Yeah, Technicolor.
The Poe story, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
While we're talking about John, I assume you have favorites of theirs, John.
Yeah, no,
but I just want to say real quick, and I'm not trying to push the anthology I edited, Autumn Cthulhu, but I really have to say, yeah, it was late and it was long from John, and he's like apologetic, and he's like, I don't know if you want to put this in the book, and it's a novella, really, not a short story, called Anchor, and I think you're going to have it in a collection sometime in the future, John, I'm sure, but right now, you can only read it in Autumn Cthulhu, and it's not just one of my favorite John Langan stories. It's one of my favorite stories, period. I was just really blown away when I read it, John. Seriously. I told you that at the time, but it's still there. So,
as far as Paul and Stephen go, I mean, it's kind of funny, because like I think about how the stories that they get supplemented over the course of your friendship. So, like I remember when I first met Paul and he made me buy a copy of his first collection in hardcover.
Stop it.
And I paid full price. Anyway,
but you're not still bitter about it.
He had this story in there called Dole as Ribbit. And it was this sort of dystopian, kind of horrifying kind of story, and it was just heartbreaking, and it was a kind of early story that you read and you're like, holy cow, this guy has the goods, but it was also sort of, and I remember, like, I think it was the first time I stayed at his house, I was talking to his wife about this, and she was like, I know, that was the last thing of his I read, he made me read that. And if you read the story, you'll understand why that's so funny. But then, like, he, after that, like his early stuff, like there's a lot of good stuff in that early collection, but it was kind of like he just, like he improved, so, like it was like it's like so steep, it was practically vertical, and a story called It's Against the Law to Feed the Ducks, which I just found utterly like terrifying in a way, because it's in a way it's like a Shirley Jackson story. There's this family and they've gone on vacation and they're this little lake up in the mountains, and there's it's against the law to feed the ducks, but then there's also like something happens and you don't know what that is, but it's a disaster, and the family, like, and most of the story is focused through the consciousness of these little kids. So, you understand that, like, there's been a nuclear explosion or a limited nuclear war, or like something really bad has happened and everything is changing. And it's such an early, still kind of early, brilliant piece. And I think recently, a lot of the stuff that's in Growing Things is just kind of top notch. I mean, here's this story, man, what is it, 17 postcards of Dennisport, or 15?
19 snapshots.
Snapshots of Dennisport, and it's like told through a series of postcards, and so, like, it's it's a technically clever story, and I'm always turned on by that. I always love it when someone does cool things with the way you tell the story. But the emotional heart of that story, it just clobbers you. It just it is really something. And I think like Paul, I would agree, like Raphael, as far as Stephen goes. I mean, I can remember reading that in Cemetery Dance. I'm pretty sure it was, and like I thought to myself, oh, all right, this is one of those stories where you think things are going to be a certain way, and then the writer's going to be like, no, I was just kidding. And then it's like, holy, they are that, like there's this insane scene that happens where you're just like, what was that? And like that was, I feel like that was, I don't know, like what's the right way to put it? Like, I felt like it was like this like announcement, it was like here's a guy who's here to write horror and chew bubblegum, and he's out of bubblegum, like it was just
nice.
And I think, like, over the years, like every time every time I see an anthology with one of Stephen's stories in it, I'll grab that anthology. There's not too many writers I'll do that for anymore, you know. And I think the story he wrote in for Fearful Symmetries for Ellen Datlow's anthology, which is it's about a Stephen King reading group, and it does this whole, again, this sort of crazy meta thing that also is really freaky and frightening. I mean, I guess that's the thing, right? You know, the reason that I feel like I became friends with these guys was because I loved their stuff, you know, and I was like with these guys, the same thing with Laird, you know, that like they were doing and they continue to do what they're doing with just like this utter integrity. And there was never the sense that either of them was like kind of phoning it in or was like, you know, the commercial thing we were talking about, you know, the disposable thing. That no, it was like, you know, this is all autobiography, as it were. I think about, you know, Bradbury used to say that about I think it was Theodore Sturgeon, that he like hated Sturgeon because he would read Sturgeon and he'd be like, oh man, I gotta up my game, you know, and that's how I feel. I when I was younger, I thought it was sort of funny to say hate. Now I don't think that's so funny anymore. But like I you know, I read these guys and I just feel like, man, you know, like it's like they keep me honest. You know, like I read Peter Straub and I'm like, well, that's Peter Straub or whatever, you know, but I'm like, shit, Paul's a couple of years younger than I am, and so Stephen, you know, so it's like I have no excuse, you know. So
well, yeah. First of all, I want to ask Paul and Stephen, you know, what's coming next. I just say that John's got a book coming out called Children of the Fang, which will be out when, John? Sorry.
End of August. I think it's August 23rd, but I think I'm wrong about that date.
Okay.
Just think of it as the Slee Stack book, and that'll be all you need.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, so Stephen, on the 14th is the only, July 14th is the only good Indian.
Yeah.
Yeah. On September the 1st is, I'm sorry, the Mannequin title.
Night
of the Mannequins. Yes. Yeah. Can you talk about what's next, or is that about what you can talk about right now?
It hasn't been announced yet, so I probably can't announce it. I haven't been released to say stuff, so I can't say stuff.
Well, we have two good books, Stephen Graham Jones books to look forward to the next couple of months, so next few months. Paul, is there anything you can say after Survivor Song?
So Survivor Song and in the paperback of Growing Things on July 7th. William Morrow and actually Titan Books in the UK are going to re-release The Little Sleep and No Sleep to Wonderland in early 2021, if we're all still alive.
Special COVID tie-in edition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something I could, you know, maybe coming in 2021, but like it's not official yet. But I've also just started it. Not 2021, 2022.
Well, you've certainly given everyone a really stellar reason to pick up the paperback version of Growing Things, you know.
Yeah, it's been kind of fun that Morrow lets me like do an extra thing for the paperback, to the point where I kind of feel bad, you know. At some point I always put that stuff online because I don't want people who sprung for the hardcover to be like, hey, I don't get the extra thing, you know. So like I did like a big Twitter tweets thread where I did just about all of I basically copied the essay. It took a lot of tweets.
It's like when they used to release the DVDs, and people buy the DVDs.
I don't know, like
here's the really good DVD. 6 months later.
Yeah, I don't know, like liner notes. It's like pretending like you're not a writer, it's pretending you're a musician, or pretending you're like a movie, or I don't know. All of us who grew up reading like King always, especially for short story collections, I always loved reading like the author talking about the story afterwards. So
yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's fun that Morrow. It's funny, I did it for a Head Full of Ghosts. I wasn't sure if they wanted me to keep doing it. But every time, like, all right, what do you get for us this time? I'm like, oh, crap, I don't even know. I had something ready for a Head Full of Ghosts, but I didn't have anything ready for the other books.
Well, Stephen and Paul, really appreciate you guys being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah.
I want to just point out a couple things real quick before we go. Our friend, he's a panelist, but he's not here today. he's created a group on Facebook called Arkham Book Exchange. So this isn't just Lovecraftian, it's just what he called it, where people can buy and sell weird fiction books, basically horror, adjacent type things. So just go to Facebook and put in Arkham Book Exchange if you're interested in that. And then I just want to mention in closing that next week we've got F. Paul Wilson. He's got a collection called Signals, which, if I understand correctly, is a prequel to Night World, the Adversary cycle of books. So, and then you guys were talking a bit about the Final Cut, 7 stories in there. On the 12th, we've got Ellen Datlow. And then on the 26th, I don't know if you guys have heard of this guy, but Larry Barron will be here. So,
hey, that's great.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
Paul.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Sorry, Paul. Sorry, John. So anyway, anything else before we close? I really appreciate you guys being here. It's been really great talking with you. So,
yeah, it's been really fun.
All right, man.
Thank you.
You got to promise to let me know what you think of Night Country, Stephen. So,
Yep.
All right, man. Thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you next week.
All right.
Night,